I hope you're well. So I bought the new cordless Festool domino a couple of weeks ago at the D&M tool show. I only recently got it out of the box, and there's no denying the uniqueness of the design, like a domino dromedary. I think the designers definitely had the hump with the engineers. It's a pretty Spartan scope of delivery, as we've come to expect. You don't get much more than the tool for your 900 quid. Add in a slimline 4-amp battery with a submarine cells, and you're into the thick end of a grand. And all that gets you is the tool, the slightly changed plastic support foot, more on that shortly, and a very, very small spanner. Actually, I also received a very nicely packaged and presented Domino Connect fitting, just the one, which is arguably a little less useful than the one sheet of abrasive you get when you buy a Festool sander. The Domino comes with a 5mm bit fitted as standard, it always has, and as a fitted furniture guy working mostly in sheet goods, I use the 5mm bit with 5x30mm dominoes almost exclusively for years before needing anything else. 30mm domino, of course, because there's a 15mm plunge in both the face and the edge of the board, so no worries about getting the depth wrong and blasting through the face of an 18mm or 3/4 inch sheet. If you prefer to stick with a rule of thirds or splash out on a 6mm bit, then my friends at Trend, on my suggestion, I have to say, have a 6x30mm loose tenon amongst their range of consumables. I never expect to need to use the domino on site. I think I could count on the thumb of one hand the number of times I've actually done that on an install. But I bought the cordless as it's a new style of machine at this size with the rear grab handle. I wanted to get some experience of it. There's also an all-new corded domino, and that follows the much more similar, much more traditional style and layout of the original. Now, I haven't had this long enough or used it enough yet to review it properly. That'll come later on. But I wanted to give a few first impressions and share a few surprises that I came across too. And yes, maybe slay one urban myth about the domino as well. So surprise number one is that it's still a system. Yeah, there are some cosmetic changes to the little buttons and levers for the spindle lock and the front fence assembly release, and the Bristol levers too that lock the fence. But I can actually swap out the whole front fence assembly complete from my daisy fresh and shiny new 2025 cordless domino with my well-used 2006 example. You may wonder why anybody would want to do that, and the answer is probably because they can, in the same way that someone may want to mix their original 1934 Lego bricks with what's currently on sale because they can. But perhaps a more considered answer would be that the fence was always a bit of a weak spot on the original domino, and it's been much improved on the new model, as well as having the new registration pin layout. More on that shortly. Surprise number two is that the ergonomic handle redesign, like the Domino XL that it takes its cues from, seems to make it remarkably front heavy. My 2006 corded domino weighs in at 3.3 kilos or thereabouts. This new cordless version is closer to 3.6. And that jumps to 4.2 when you add a lightweight battery. That's about 2 pounds heavier. That's quite a lot in the hand. And I know this isn't that big of a deal. Tools that carry their own power supply with them will always be on the heavier side. But what I did find surprising was the overall balance. With the battery top and center, it handles okay for edge mortises, but for the face mortise, the weight of the battery is dragging it away from the workpiece, even with a little support bracket fitted. By the way, I think the support bracket or foot has always been on the lighter weight side, even back in 2006 when you had to pay extra for it. But I think it's a very poor choice on this particular model, and you'd be better served by using one of the many third-party alternatives, whether that's this Benchdogs Tools Big Base, the TSO Bigfoot, or a DIY option. I'm sure all the 3D printing guys out there will be all over this, and if they're not, then I may have to be. Talking of design cues from the XL, it probably isn't that much of a surprise that the new Domino has double reference pins. The Domino's always had pins that reference off the edge of the workpiece. This first production run has actual sprung pins, much like the Maffel Dowler, but they were replaced soon after by the little paddles, and these developed into the pivoting pins that came along with the XL. The new Domino has 2 pairs of these, and they can be pushed back into the body of the machine independently or released as needed. I mentioned earlier that the little plastic support foot had changed slightly. One of the lesser known features of the original was that it had little plastic pegs, little legs that could be swung out and used to reference off the edge of the material instead of the sprung pins. The pins put a mortise on 37mm centers from the edge of the workpiece. Yes, the 32mm system has a lot to answer for, but the little pegs made this 20mm from the edge, much closer, obviously, and actually sometimes they felt a little bit too close, especially on a wider mortise. On the 2025 support foot, those pegs have been removed because that extra pair of sprung pins on the new domino fence puts the mortise closer to the edge, but now at around 22mm centers, that extra couple of millimeters of breathing room clearly makes for a much more comfortable plunge. Surprise number 4, and a welcome surprise, is that Festool hadn't changed the location or size of the pair of M5 tapped holes in the domino base plate. Obviously Festool use these for their own accessories, but the presence of these fixing points, something that isn't on any other handheld jointing system, as far as I'm aware, the presence of these fixing points has enabled and encouraged the growth of a vast ecosystem of third-party accessories, not least of which is the domino plate, a kind of fixed fence with many advantages, especially when you're working regularly with specific material thicknesses. This is my original from Seneca Woodworking. Benchmark Tools has one, TSO as well, I think, and I'll have one coming along shortly too. All of these could have been completely derailed, of course, by a simple change at Festool's end, not necessarily out of malice, but I'm sure if they felt that a change would have been an improvement, they'd have made that change regardless. But the fact that they haven't, as well as being a testament to the original design, of course, means that it can be business as usual for the third-party accessory makers. And lastly, while I'd love to be able to tell you that, surprise, Festool have finally seen sense and added an 18mm setting to the fence preset on the side of the machine. No, I'm afraid that hasn't happened. We're all still stuck with nothing whatsoever between 16 and 20mm. I can't begin to guess at what the whole redesign has cost, and I don't just mean money, but time, effort, and attention too. But it does start to feel like a bit of an intentional bloody-mindedness not to include one more step in a piece of molded plastic that represents a very commonly used material thickness. The new fence scale on the right side of the machine now is definitely clearer and easier to use than the original, but if the preset step gauge is there for the convenience of the user, then surely excluding a commonly used material thickness is the very opposite of that. There are third-party 3D printed options available, of course, but if Festool themselves can't be bothered with it, then it would be nice if a third party were to machine something up that's a little bit more quality orientated. I'm sure they'd sell well, whatever the price. In the meantime, like everybody else, I guess, I'll just use the 16mm step and set the fence height against a 1mm packer or shim to get that 9mm midpoint. Yes, it always feels like £1,000 well spent when you use a 20p piece of plastic to set your fence height. So that's my first thoughts on Festool's new cordless domino, the DFC 500. I'll have a more detailed look at this after I've put a few more miles on it. But before I call this one done, I do just want to slay one urban myth, one bit of domino folklore that's grown up around the domino mortise width selector. That's the fact that the machine must be running in order to change widths. This came about because back in the day, when the domino was new and someone without any mechanical knowledge couldn't get their width selector to move, it's basically a little gearbox, and sometimes the gears just hammer to stop where they won't quite mesh together to allow the change. That happens sometimes, and the solution is just to blip the power switch and shift the gears around, and the selector would be okay to move. This became a recommendation to make the change with the machine running, but it was never an actual requirement. As long as the selector moves comfortably, there's absolutely no harm in changing the mortise widths with the power off. Anyway, I hope that helps. Thanks so much for taking a look. I will call this one done for now. If you've got any questions, pop them in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. All right, take care.